Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at something that is truly fascinating and, well, to be entirely honest, a little unnerving. When we think of environmental disasters, our minds usually jump right to the cinematic stuff, right? Things that happen fast and loud. But today, we're going to expose the invisible environmental monsters lurking right beneath our feet. We're talking about crises that accumulate incrementally, and they're often entirely masked by our normal everyday lives. So let's contrast the two main types of natural threats. We all know the loud disasters: earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis. They're abrupt, they grab international headlines, and they usually strike with zero warning. But then there are the silent disasters, things like drought, land subsidence, and ecological shifts. These develop really slowly. And the subtlety here is exactly what makes them so dangerous. Because they don't have that immediate fanfare, by the time their devastating effects are fully visible to us, our options to actually mitigate them might already be severely limited. All right, let's get right into part one, the slow thirst. Now, this is arguably one of the most insidious of all the invisible threats. We all know what a drought is, right? But the absolute most terrifying word in its definition is prolonged. This isn't just a dry summer, it's a gradual, grinding scarcity. It sneaks up on a region, accumulating over months, sometimes years, quietly draining aquifers, threatening biodiversity, and just completely stripping away basic water security before the alarm bells even start ringing. And while this is naturally occurring, this slow thirst is dangerously accelerated by our own human activities. Rising global temperatures spike evaporation rates, which drastically reduces soil moisture. Then you add deforestation to the mix. Chopping down forests diminishes local rainfall and completely throws off the natural water cycle. On top of all that, we have the massive overuse of our water resources, stuff like excessive irrigation, intense groundwater extraction, and heavy industrial use. We are essentially attacking our own water supply from three different angles at the exact same time. To really put the financial impact into perspective, $3 billion. Let that sink in for a second. That is the massive agricultural loss the state of California suffered during their prolonged multi-year drought from 2012 to 2016. This slow thirst caused widespread crop failure, it drove up food prices, and led to significant groundwater depletion. It's just a prime example of how an invisible threat suddenly manifests as a massive economic blow. But hey, the consequences go far beyond just economics. The 2010 to 2011 drought in the Horn of Africa triggered a devastating humanitarian crisis that affected literally millions of people. When agriculture fails in highly vulnerable regions, it reduces food security to the point of outright famine, and that cascades into massive societal consequences, triggering forced migration, intense conflict over whatever resources are left, and long-term economic hardship. This slow thirst eventually forces humanity into a very tight corner. Moving on to part two, the sinking earth. So shifting from water scarcity above ground to the actual physical ground we stand on, we face something called land subsidence. It's basically the gradual sinking of the Earth's surface. Just like drought, it happens entirely out of sight, deep below the soil line. You obviously can't feel the ground dropping a few millimeters a day, but the structural impacts of this settling are absolutely catastrophic. Think of it as a chain reaction of mechanical failure deep underground. Step 1, we engage in excessive groundwater pumping. Step 2, with that water gone, the underground aquifers lose their internal structural support. Without water literally holding the soil layers up, we hit step 3. The surface just settles and sinks. We are quite literally hollowing out the foundation beneath our own cities. The hidden consequences of this sinking compromise modern infrastructure from the bottom up. Buildings crack, pipelines rupture, and roads collapse. Environmentally, wetlands and aquifers can be permanently altered. But honestly, perhaps the most dangerous consequence is the increased risk of flooding. By lowering the land levels, communities drastically increase their vulnerability to floods and storm surges. It's a bit of a tragic irony, really. By pumping out too much water, we are ultimately making ourselves far more susceptible to drowning in it. To really anchor this concept, 9 meters. That is almost 30 feet. Extensive groundwater pumping has caused parts of Mexico City to sink by up to 9 meters in just the past century. Just think about the sheer volume of water that had to be extracted and the massive geological shift required to lower a huge metropolitan area by 30 feet. It's mind-boggling. Now, different environments react to these pressures in unique ways. Mexico City's sinking is primarily driven by intensive groundwater pumping. But Venice, Italy? Their situation is a dangerous cocktail of groundwater extraction combined with natural sediment compaction. By compounding natural geological settling with human resource extraction, these incredibly famous regions are inadvertently accelerating their own demise. Which brings us to part 3, the human ripple effect. You see, these localized disasters don't just happen in a vacuum. They trigger a devastating domino effect across our ecosystems. Gradual land degradation leads to soil erosion and desertification, which relentlessly reduces our agricultural productivity. At the same time, persistent water stress from declining river flows affects urban and rural communities alike. This causes severe ecosystem disruption. Habitats change, biodiversity drops, and we experience devastating species loss. These long-term crises unfold over decades, practically invisible to the public, right up until they reach a critical, irreversible threshold.
And here is the uncomfortable truth. Human activity is the main accelerant. We amplify natural vulnerabilities through unsustainable resource use, intensive agriculture, and deforestation. We compound the issue with urban planning failures, like building massive cities on vulnerable, sinking soils. And perhaps worst of all, policy gaps leave us with a really dangerous lack of proactive monitoring. We are paving the way for our own structural failures.
All right, let's pivot to some good news in part 4, Fighting the Quiet Threat. Because we are absolutely not powerless here. Integrating science, technology, and policy gives us a direct roadmap to fight back. For groundwater depletion, we can implement sustainable limits and active recharge techniques. For subsidence, we don't have to sit around waiting for buildings to crack. We can use remote satellite monitoring to detect instability straight from space. And for these slow onset hazards, we just have to design our cities around urban resilience planning, accommodating these risks well before they become full-blown emergencies. Think of it as a mitigation arsenal. We have incredibly robust tools at our disposal. Afforestation and soil conservation can reduce erosion and increase local rainfall. Climate-adaptive agriculture protects our food supply by relying on drought-resistant crops. Technologically, early warning systems for water shortages are vital, but they have to be paired with strict regulations on mining and resource extraction. And finally, an educated public is a prepared public. Aggressive disaster preparedness campaigns are essential for keeping our communities safe. There's this thought from the source material that just perfectly hits the nail on the head, and I want to leave you with it. The absence of immediate catastrophe does not imply safety. Just because the ground isn't shaking and the wind isn't howling, it doesn't mean our environment is totally secure. Sustainable management and global cooperation are absolutely crucial to prevent these gradual disasters from turning into irreversible catastrophes. So, I've got a question for you, and I challenge you to look at your surroundings with newly opened eyes. From the water coming out of your kitchen tap to the soil beneath your local roads, what invisible threats are accumulating beneath your feet today? Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.